I'm Tom Baker, this is Chasing Cars, and today we're in the Sahara Desert in Morocco to check out Volkswagen's new flagship SUV, the third generation Touareg. Now, the Touareg 3 will be coming to Australia around mid-2019, but we're out here in Africa having a first look at the car. Now, this SUV did launch for Europe some time ago, and it's been rolling around on continental European roads for most of 2018, so it's a long wait for Australians to get their hands on the new Touareg. However, it'll be worth the wait. It's a pretty good thing. We've been bowling around the desert and around the cities of Morocco for the last few days to get a feel for what life will be like with Volkswagen's flagship product when it arrives to replace the fairly venerable second generation Touareg next year. Initially, it'll be coming back with an all V6 diesel lineup for Australia. A V8 diesel is on the cards later on. And what takes a massive step up is ambiance and luxury in the interior, which is probably the only big thing that started to date the second generation car. So as usual, we'll take a look in the cabin, then we'll head out on the road and off it in the new third generation Volkswagen Touareg. Underneath an enormous panoramic sunroof, the cabin of the third generation Touareg is a massive step forward for this vehicle over the outgoing car. Now, I actually reckon the Touareg 2 aged really well, apart from in the cabin, where its dated technology meant that it was cast aside by its rivals some time ago. That is no longer the case in the new Touareg, which I actually think has the best cabin of any vehicle in the Volkswagen group. Now, that's pretty surprising given that VW is basically the mid-tier brand of the group, but you get some absolutely mega tech. Now, this is called the InnoVision cockpit. It's a 15-inch screen, nice and widescreen and horizontally proportioned here next to you, and you get this great wraparound aesthetic. Of course, a big active info display ahead of you as well. You can run a big map in there, but I actually reckon the cartography on the big screen here is just beautiful. Now, that is an option. As standard in Australia, you'll get a 9.2-inch screen in the center here, but you've got this enormous gap to fill. So if you don't have the 15-incher in there, well, what are you doing? That said, all of the materials in here are standard and they feel great. Beautiful stitched leather steering wheel, nice soft touch here on the dashboard and on the doors, but still some areas of scratchy plastic where it's clear to me that Volkswagen are protecting the status of the Audi and the Bentley as more premium than this vehicle. You also get pretty great seats in the Touareg. We've driven hundreds and hundreds of kilometers in these over the last few days, and they're just so supportive and comfy. Heated and cooled, that will at least be optional. We're not entirely sure on final Australian spec. Practicality is good too. Big cup holders between the seats, a huge bin here in between the two, 4 USB ports for the car, and decent sized door bins for water bottles. The back seat of the Touareg is also pretty accommodating. The doors open nice and wide and the roofline's high. You get a nice defined thunk when you close the door, and fitting a child seat should be easy because you've got clearly marked out ISOFIX points on both seats, but you can lose the cap. It's surprising they haven't gone for just a fixed cap that you can't possibly misplace. But space for people bigger than a baby is pretty good. For me, at 6 foot, I've got another inch or two of headroom despite the sunroof. Legroom's fine, and I've got heaps of toe room sitting behind myself. The seat base angle is also okay, so I reckon you could do a few hours back here without a problem. You've got some amenities too. Fold down armrest here with 2.5 cup holders. You got air vents, and in fact, this car is optioned with 4-zone climate control and heated outboard rear seats. Then you get this cool little tray that you can deploy here. You've got a 12-volt socket, 2 powered USBs, and in Europe at least, a powered household power point as well. You can move the back seats, they're on rails, so you can come forward. You can go much further back to give yourself more room. And you can also recline the bench. In fact, it's already at its most reclined setting, so, you know, it's pretty nice back here. The only problem is that the Touareg is a big SUV with no third row. Why is that? Well, I don't really know. You could guess that it's because the Audi Q7 has 3 rows and it's not that much more expensive than this vehicle, but I'll leave that up to you. Would you consider something as big as the Touareg even though you can't get a 6th and 7th person in the back? Let me know in the comments. The backside of the new Touareg is pretty distinct visually from the current car. I really like this wide space lettering here for the nameplate. It's pretty contemporary. Electric tailgate, that's to be expected at this end of the market. And this Touareg's got a big flexible square boot. Plenty of room for this additional spare. Obviously we need that for the conditions we're driving in. But you've got some special features in the form of remote pulls for the back seats. Continuing from the old Touareg, you've got adjustable air suspension here in the boot for lifting in and out heavy stuff, which is nice. But you've also got a pretty trick retractable tow ball. Now, sadly, because of Australian design rules being so restrictive, this handy little feature probably won't come to Australia, at least initially. It's something awesome the Europeans feature pretty commonly on these kinds of cars. Hopefully we'll see that come down under sometime soon. With all that important static stuff out of the way, and before we get behind the wheel of the new Touareg, I'd like to tell you a bit more about our rather unique trip to drive this Volkswagen. I'm sure some of you have wondered how this SUV got its distinctive name, and many of them will know that it's actually named for the Touareg people, a nomadic Berber group who live and move over vast areas of the Sahara Desert, including the very southern edge of Morocco. In fact, on the dunes where this was shot near the Algerian border, French colonial soldiers were met with severe resistance by Touareg tribesmen 200 years ago. The Berbers remain in this part of Morocco, where a small group of us were able to drive the new Touareg SUV across beautiful landscapes, meeting the hospitable Moroccan people and experiencing the changing and challenging weather here on this wild northwestern outcrop of Africa. So what's the new Volkswagen Touareg like to drive? Well, it's actually been quite interesting driving it in Morocco because while much of this country is very wild and quite unlike anything back home, the sealed roads are actually a decent replica of the general quality of tarred road that we have back in Australia. So that means that unlike most overseas car launches which happen on the glossy smooth roads of continental Europe, we can actually tell you a little bit what the Touareg is like to drive on a representative road surface. But before we get to that point, I'll tell you a bit about the engines of the Touareg that are coming to Australia that we can expect in 2019. Initially, the Touareg will come as a launch edition with a 190 kilowatt tune of the V6 TDI engine. Now, this is actually a Euro 5 engine, so it won't have a few common features today like stop-start, but it's the first one that Volkswagen Australia are able to get supply of for our market. So it's not a bad place to start, 190 kilowatts, same power as the top-end Amarok. Later on, and more permanently, the range will be twofold with a 170 kilowatt V6 diesel and a 210 kilowatt engine. Now, we've driven exclusively in the 210 kilowatt 600 Newton meter tune of the vehicle here in Morocco. It's the same engine that you see in plenty of Volkswagen Group products. In the Audis, it's referred to as the 50 TDI. It's a really, really nice engine. Pacey, smooth, refined, and surprisingly economical. It's a big turbocharger, so there is quite a lot of turbo lag. Adding a bi-turbo setup would solve that, but Volkswagen are soldiering on with a large single turbocharger. That's one downside. When you plant the throttle, it's a often 2 or 3 second wait till you get full power coming through, but thankfully that big serve of torque is basically across the rev range. Surprisingly, petrol power won't be available. Given the concessions to petrol in the last few years in the Volkswagen lineup, we did expect the 3-litre TFSI engine, the longitudinal V6 turbo petrol that you also see in a lot of Audis. We expected to see that in Australia. It's not going to come along, at least not initially. The overall experience is pretty refined. It's a quiet car, the cabin's comfortable, it's easy to see out of, so it's a very relaxing car to spend long hours in. The handling, what we've been able to get a gauge on with the handling is that, it's pretty competent. It doesn't feel worlds away handling-wise from the Touareg second generation. It's a fairly big vehicle, and there's body roll to contend with. It's not super sporty, it's meant to be a cruiser, and it does pretty well at that. What I will say is that the steering is very nice and linear, it's quite direct, and it's also quite quicker than you might expect for a vehicle like this, so it's quite fun to take down a decent road for what it is. Now, the ride quality. Air suspension will remain an option, and you'll want to go for it because it evens out the ride very, very nicely in the Touareg. It also did on the second gen car. You got a variety of driving modes. Comfort mode, still a bit boaty. Sport mode is, it's actually relatively compliant, but normal is actually where I spent my time. It's a good balance between control and compliance without feeling like you're just floating down the road with no idea what's going on the road surface. That said, the big caveat is that the vehicles on this expedition have been on completely non-stock tyres. General grabber, 18-inch wheels, very high profile. There will be some changes to noise, to ride, and of course to traction when we get the car in Australia on street tyres and a lower profile tyre, because we won't be getting the 18-inch wheels in Australia. It'll range from 19 to 21-inch. So off-road, the new Touareg is pretty competent. Not that these things have ever been a purely on-road focused SUV. It's a bit of a hidden detail that actually the Volkswagen Touareg has always been a decent off-roader, especially if you equipped it with the air suspension, which was available on the second generation vehicle and remains an option for the third generation car once it reaches Australia. With the air suspension involved, you've actually got 258 millimeters of total ground clearance on a super high mode that operates at or under 20 kilometers per hour. You've also got weighting depth of 580 millimeters with the air suspension, 500 mil on conventional steel springs. Now, out here in Morocco, we've obviously done our fair share of off-roading. Today we're out in the mud around the Atlas Mountains, wading through a fair few river crossings and negotiating some sharp stones. And yeah, the super high mode is very capable, certainly enough for this kind of work. Wading proficiency feels pretty good, but once again, we are on general grabber all-terrain tyres, which are certainly not standard. On the dunes, which we also spent a fair bit of time on, the Touaregs are pretty good. In fact, the best way to demonstrate how good is probably just to go straight to the gratuitous tuning shots. We did have one issue with a very low speed impact that took out a front apron, but every other car fared very well. And once again, on these tyres, traction was no problem. And in fact, if you go for the off-road package, which is an option for Australia, you've got adjustable off-road modes where you can nominate the terrain that you're crossing, gravel, sand, snow, etc. And it gives you a few more settings that you're able to change. So that, in a 14-minute nutshell, is a look at the next Volkswagen flagship SUV. The third Touareg is a fundamentally good vehicle, powered by strong diesel engines, riding comfortably on air suspension and featuring some very impressive cabin technology. At first glance it seems very good, if not perfect. The lack of a third row and a true flagship engine do seem like missed opportunities. However, as a higher than Tiguan offer in the VW lineup that shares critical DNA with far more expensive vehicles, few people will be disappointed. It was quite magical to drive the Touareg in the home of the Touareg people, captured in these vignettes by our talented photographer friend Chris Benny. Morocco is a fascinating place, at once modern and ancient. Anybody who thinks this part of the world is just a sandpit couldn't be more wrong. We drove the Touareg through a grand variety of scenes, from the lush to the barren to the truly awe-inspiring. The chance to drive through Africa was one of the most interesting things I have done in this work I'm fortunate to do, and that is only possible due to the support of the loyal Chasing Cars viewers here on this website and this channel. Thanks to you, we can go out into the world and capture this sort of content. It really does make an enormous difference, and I really appreciate it. Now, we'll be driving Volkswagen's new Touareg again on this SUV's arrival to Australia later this year. For now though, make sure to help us out by liking, subscribing and sharing this video to help Chasing Cars continue our work in 2019.